Things that we're going to be doing in our Wednesday talks is looking at some of the core principles of Science of Mind. What are some of the core principles behind this new thought? And it's funny because every week, I spend a lot of time preparing what I'm going to talk about, and I've told you what my minister, my homiletics, my minister, speaker, teacher says. There's the talk you plan to give, there's the talk you give, and then there's the talk everyone heard. So I could probably give the same talk every week, and it just, something else happens when I sit here, and every week I walk up and I'm like, what was I going to say? And I have this panic moment, and then I just say, I'm here to be of service to Spirit. And so Spirit is going to say what needs to be said today, and whatever needs to be heard today is going to be heard today. And so that's how that is going to go. We're talking about oneness, and our title, as you may have seen on your program, is, no, I can do math, but it says 1 + 1 = 1. Now, what's that about? 1 + 1 = 1. And it's a conversation about unity. It's about oneness. And I think that every principle that we discuss has at its core a basic principle of oneness. It's this whole idea that we can never be separated from the divine. And one of the first places it starts is we're looking at, well, what is the divine? What is the divine source? And the thing that comes up for me most easily is to think of God as the supreme God being energy with consciousness. That it is everywhere, that wherever there is anything to be, there is energy, this divine energy with consciousness. That it always was, it always will be, but that we inside of us have a part of that consciousness. In Ernest Holmes, the founder of religious science, talks about that we are a drop of the ocean, but we are not the entire ocean. So everything that is in that drop of water, that's the ocean, we have in us. So we have the capacity to act as the entire ocean. Well, there's a lot of different analogies on how we think about oneness. Some of the analogies are, for example, if you were to look at the Sandia Mountains, and you were to look at it, you would just perceive it as one block, one thing, the mountain. But as you go up closer, you'll see there's a lot going on there. There's trees and ecosystems and birds and animals and plants. Even the mountain itself is made up of millions and millions of rocks that are made up of millions and millions of minerals, that are made up of molecules, that are made up of atoms. And all of it is energy. And so when we start talking about the concept of oneness, we look at the microcosm of things, and we look at the macrocosm of things. We look at things as small as they will go, and we look at it as big as they will go. And inside of all of that is God. So there isn't anything that exists that doesn't have this aspect of oneness in it. But we are here in this lifetime, living this game of life. We came as a consciousness into these human bodies, and we're having this experience. And everything that occurs, that happens to us, is happening inside of our experience. And so one of the things that I want to talk about inside of oneness is this idea that everything that is occurring is life is happening for us, it's not happening to us. Because we have a part of that infinite consciousness in us. We have divine love. We have divine intelligence. We have divine understanding. We have this creative power where we have all the stuff that it takes. But what is it that has us understand? How do we expand it just beyond being someone who's a victim of circumstances? How do we expand our consciousness behind life happens to me, not I create all of life? I create everything that happens around me, that happens to me. I create my experience. What takes us out of being the victim to the realm of being the creator is uniquely tied to our awareness of oneness. Because without that foundational step, that awareness of oneness, we start getting into this illusion of separation. The illusion of separation is, I'm separate from you. Life happens to me. You're different from me, so then there must be something wrong with you. And there's a lot of differences. Sometimes when we see differences in other people, in other situations, sometimes the ego humanness in us wants to silence that phone or whatever that is. Wants to silence something that's dissonant from what we are, from what we think is right. We see a lot of, one of the things that came up for me and as I was studying this week is this conversation about religious tolerance. There's a lot of different religions in the world, but there used to be a lot of other different religions in the world that we don't know about because someone wanted to silence a voice that sounded different from theirs. What comes up for me is, I don't know if you ever heard of the Gnostics. They were a Christian group that came up around the 3rd century. And they had some beliefs that sound interestingly familiar. Like, there's a divine God that lives inside of each of us. And that there's a oneness that pervades all of humanity. And that it is our responsibility to expand our expression of the divine in us. That each of us has a unique expression of the divine. Does any of that sound familiar? Right?
Yeah.
What happened to the Gnostics? Well, they were pretty much wiped out by the fundamental church at that time. You look at the Cathars. The Cathars were a similar sect. Claimed to be, divinely, from some of the disciples of Jesus. They were systematically subject to genocide and pretty much wiped out. Their writings are being discovered now, just like the Gnostic Gospels are being discovered in the last, I think 77 was one of the last, the 4 Gospels were discovered and translated. You look at, what was it the Cathars were doing? Well, one of the things is they had it that women were sacred and women could be priests and that women were divine. And that there was a special ability of women, not more than others, but women were certainly the priests and the religious leaders. One of the things that the ancient writings said that they did, tell me if this sounds familiar, is they would heal with their hands. They would put their hands on the person and their hands would get hot. And then that person would be healed. Anybody heard of Reiki? The Cathars were killed off as a subjects of genocide in about the 11th century. And the Japanese gentleman that founded the Reiki movement, something from the spirit realm gave him that intelligence, and then it's become proliferated now. Let's think about in the Moors, the North African Muslims that ruled Spain for about 400 years. They had advances in medicine and in technology. In fact, it was using Moorish maps that Columbus discovered America, right? They had surgery. They had a lot of sophisticated medical techniques. They were very sophisticated, very advanced in architecture and literature. What happened to them? Well, when they were driven out of Spain, all of a sudden, that became subversive. And it played a role in Europe being thrown into the Dark Ages. Let's look at Native American spirituality. Let's look at the genocide of the Native American people. Where has all that information gone? Let's look at the rainforest. They say they found a cure for cancer in the rainforest, but they can't find it fast enough because they're being chopped down. Why am I saying all of this? Because throughout history, there has been a silencing of other voices in the name of what somebody thought was right. And today we are seeing very similar activities. There are differing views. There is an America that's completely polarized. There's America that says this one thing is right and God says this is right. There's another side that says this is right and God said that is right. But all point of views are sacred. Because the spirit of the divine intelligence lives inside every person. And so every point of view and every thought has at its source some divine spark. Now that doesn't mean that what somebody else believes lies within the highest vibrational intentions for this planet, right? And that's one of the reasons why you constantly hear, us saying in Science of Mind, we are the guardians of consciousness. That as consciousness and values roll back and forth like the sands, roll back and forth like the beach tide, we are standing in this place of divine consciousness saying, I am the embodiment of what is justice. I am the embodiment of what is truth. I am the embodiment of what is love. Right? So we are that consciousness, and the tides will come and go. But it's our duty. It's our seva. Remember last week we talked about our sacred service. It's our seva to stand inside of knowing what is divine consciousness, inside of knowing what is right. The tides of free will come and go. The Creator gave us all free will. And because of that ultimate freedom, because of that ultimate gift of free will, we can create, we can miscreate. But inside of oneness, when we know that we are standing inside of that divine flow, we have the ability to know exactly who we are to be in any situation. See, the reality of it is, I'm going to have to start investing in tape. The reality of it is that each of us have a special gift to this planet. Each of us has a unique way of expressing God on this planet that is uniquely us. But not only are we someone who is expressing God uniquely as us, but everything that happens around us, if we accept that things that are happening around us are not happening to us, but happening for us, then everything starts to look at an opportunity. I read somewhere that the Chinese Mandarin word for crisis is the same as the word for opportunity. If we were to handle every crisis as if it were happening for us, and we look for the lesson in it, if we look for what is it that this is presented to me for, if I'm triggered around this thing, if I'm challenged around this thing, instead of looking at this is happening to me, if this is brought for you, what is the lesson for you to learn? What is the growth arc that you are brought specifically into this planet to learn? A lot of the things that are happening right now in the world, in politics, in our lives, and our relationships, these things, because we're experiencing them right now, feel so important. They just seem like so in your face important. But when you look at the stars and you consider the enormity of the universe, and if you look at time, let's think about that. If you look at time, the perspective starts to shift. If our spirits are immortal as part of God, if our consciousness is immortal, then that means that I may take on a lot of different bodies, but I'm going to live a really long time, right? I may come and go in different forms. So what is it about this lifetime that has me need to take on certain issues? What is the point of any of this stuff that's happening to us except that it's for you to do that soul development? Let's look at the environment. If we don't take care of the environment, what happens? We don't take care of Mother Earth. Mother Earth doesn't take care of us. You know, maybe as a species, we cease to exist. Yeah, well, my spirit's eternal. I'll probably take some other form. Right? Maybe I'll be on another planet. I don't know. In the grand scheme of things, why is taking care of Mother Earth important now? Because it's a spiritual development for me to learn to have that stewardship and that sacredness to the planet that I'm living on. To understand that I live and breathe in synchronicity with the animals. That I live and breathe in synchronicity with what's going on with the weather, the actual earth, the energy here, the plants, all of that. The reason why I'm here is because it's for me to learn to take care of it. Not so much that the earth needs me to take care of it. Similarly, all of the things that we are experiencing have happened before. They have happened before, and you know what? Humanity survived. As a Native American, you know, we've had our lands taken, we've experienced genocide and every type of human rights abuse you can imagine. As an African American, same thing. As somebody who's married to a woman, you know, there's just been some rights that have come up really recently. You know, up until then, you could really be persecuted for being who you were, for being a woman. You could be burned at the stake for treating your kids with herbs, or knowing that, you know, that the bark of a certain tree would reduce a fever. The bark of the willow tree. Oh, you're a witch, right? And you start looking at, in fact, it was the taking away of the medical knowledge from women, calling them witches, that had medical science go into the realm of males where it wasn't particularly evolved. I mean, they were bleeding people, right? But we survived it. So why is it important right now, in our time today, that we deal with these issues? We'll eventually survive. The only reason for it is because there's a special lesson for you now. You remember in the past I've shared the story about Esther and Mordecai, about how the king, you recall this story, the king was going to kill all the Jews in the kingdom, and they were under the control of another government. So he was going to, Haman was jealous and he wanted to kill all the Jews. And so they had this beauty contest. You recall the story, and Esther was the winner of the beauty contest, so she got to be the queen. And the king didn't know she was Jewish. And so she tells her uncle, Mordecai, you know, what do I do? The king is going to kill all the Jews and he doesn't know I'm Jewish. And Mordecai tells her, who's to say, Esther, who's to say that you were not brought into the kingdom for such a time as this? So, of course, you know, you remember the story. She goes and tells the king. The king gets mad at the guy who told him to kill all the Jews and hangs him instead. On the same gallows that guy had built for her uncle. Some karmic stuff right there. The thing is that the point of that story, though, was what was the point of that happening? It was for her. It was for her people to experience the power of freedom and salvation, of being able to experience having that power. What is the point in all of us experiencing what we're experiencing? It's so that we will slough off these indices of separateness, that we will slough off these indices, everything that has us think that we're not one with everyone else. Because you remember that Jesus said that the law was fulfilled and that you love God and love your neighbor as yourself. So being one with God and being one with your neighbor is the same salvation. And you can't have one without the other. We can't have one with God and one with salvation and one with the kingdom of heaven, but except for those guys. Not dealing with those guys. Not having it. They're wrong, right? We take on that they're wrong and that's just how they are. And so as a result, our oneness with the divine is compromised because you just took a bite-sized chunk out of it by judging the neighbor. It's only to the extent that we can have and experience loving kindness with the other person that we actually even have a shot at salvation, that inner kingdom of heaven. And what comes from that inner kingdom of heaven is all the prosperity, all the health, everything that you want that has your soul prosper and be in health is all inside of that kingdom of heaven, and you can't have it if you have separateness from somebody else. That's what we do when we're doing prayer treatments. You know, when we do a prayer treatment, we start with recognition. We recognize who God is. I know that God is one. God is one with all. God is everything there is. I know who that God is. I align myself with it. And then the second step is I unify with it. I'm one with that. If I'm doing a treatment with you, I say I'm one with God and I'm one with you. And then I affirm the truth about that situation. I give thanks and release it. Well, without knowing it, there was a doctor in Hawaii who was doing this. His name was, Dr. Wren. And he went to go work at a hospital for the criminally insane. And everyone hated working at this place. I mean, the people were just completely nuts and violent. And people kept quitting and people wouldn't come to work. So it was always understaffed and people, it was just this high attrition rate. It was just a hellhole. So what he started doing was he started using this Hawaiian principle that he understood from his tradition. And he took each file and healed the person. And one by one, all the people started being healed and discharged. And pretty soon, nobody minded coming to work. And then pretty soon it became unbalanced because there was more staff than there were clients. And then there were no more clients and they had to close the hospital. And so an interviewer came to him and said, "How did you do that?" And he said, "Well, I just opened every file and I said, I love you. I'm sorry. I loved you. I'm sorry. I love you. I'm sorry." For every person. And every person was healed inside of that. Healed of criminal insanity. How does that happen? It happens inside of oneness. And that's what we're doing when we're doing a spiritual mind treatment. Is we are so in this vibration that I know that when someone comes to me and says, I'm having a relationship problem, that I take on that there is a divine source. I align myself with the vibrational energy of oneness. I know there's a divine source. I can feel it. I can see it. I experience it. I know that it is. And I just sit in the joy and the flow of that energy. And I know that I am one with it, that there's no separation. I just know it. And when I am really clear that there is no separation between me and the divine, I know there's no separation between me and you. And inside of knowing that, I know that for you there is perfect health. I know that for you that there is absolute abundance. For you there is love and joy beyond measure. That is yours. That is your birthright. And I know it. And I don't think it or hope it or wish it. It's just true. I don't have to will it into existence. And that's the thing that people have about manifestation. People think that we have to wish it and will it into existence, and if I hold on to it hard enough, maybe it will happen, right? We really think that that's what manifestation is about, and it's not. It's about that deep knowing, finding within yourself that space where I know this is true. This is in me, and I can feel it. It's just, you know. And you don't stop that treatment until you know. No. I got it. And then the Thanksgiving isn't about, I'm thankful in advance. I'm thankful for what it could do. It's like, I'm thankful this is true right now. I'm actually knowing this is the truth right now. And I'm so grateful for it. And see, the thing is that it will manifest in the material realm. But when we've done those steps, from where, starting where? From oneness. We know with absolute certainty that what we know inside of the mind of God, we have that ability to create, that we are not living at the whim of forces outside of ourselves. And that's why when I say oneness is at the absolute heart of it. And even though I told you those horror stories at the beginning, and kind of said like where you are, like what's going on doesn't matter, because the only truth that there is right now that matters is the truth that's inside of us right now in our gut. That this truth that goes on right side inside of here is the only truth that matters. And so we start to take responsibility for our lives. We start taking responsibility for every experience we have. Now, I know that's confronting. Am I responsible for the terrorist attacks? Am I responsible for the president? Am I responsible for what happened down the street? Am I responsible for what happens on the news? It depends on how far you want to take your power. To the extent that we're willing to take on being responsible for every experience we have is the extent to which we will exercise our power. Because if I believe that I am responsible for the terrorist attack, then who has to be healed? Right here. I go into that little terrorist inside of me and I treat it until I know that only God's there. Let me give you an example. Annette, with her dolphin commitment, they were killing dolphins in Taiji, and she was watching it on the films, and it was just really breaking her heart. So I felt tired of watching her, like literally agonizing in front of the computer, like, oh, I can't believe it. So I write out a treatment, right? I say, do this every day. You know, I'm like the doctor, I'm writing a prescription. She does it every day. And for the 42 days she did it, they didn't kill not one dolphin during high dolphin season for 42 solid days. It was one of the lowest seasons they had ever had in being able to hunt and kill those dolphins. Coincidence? No. It's about the extent to which we're willing to accept this concept of oneness, and to the extent that we're able to accept and express oneness. That is the extent of our pace that we start is twofold. Love God, love our brother, no matter what kind of madness he may be saying, no matter what you feel about what they said, no matter what you feel about what's going on in the world. We accept there's no such thing as outside of us. We become powerful beyond measure. And we start saying and seeing that we do change the world. Now, I'm not saying don't picket. I'm not saying don't join ACLU. I'm not saying don't do whatever you do to treat and move your feet. But when it comes to the treat part, we change the world one heart at a time. And that heart starts here.